Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again for attending our weekly call where we're going to go through the items here in Washington. Happy spring IMF and World Bank meetings to those of you who celebrate. The IMF World Bank meetings take place every spring, and it's almost like an annual tradition here because for those of us who work here, obviously they shut down a lot of the roads by the IMF and World Bank, and pretty much every hotel is fully booked, so it's kind of hard to get to travel to the region. But in terms of what does that mean, we're not covering the IMF World Bank meetings. These are more macro level, economic level. So my friends over at Bloomberg Economics are. So if you do have any questions on that, just please feel free to reach out. So what's happening? Well, this week we were going to see the House focused on appliances. They called it Appliance Week. There were actually a lot of bills related to refrigerators and microwaves, but with the Iranian attack of Israel over the weekend, things have changed. Now, a lot of the focus is going to be on the Ukraine-Israeli aid package, and there's a lot of moving pieces here. So let me just go back and take you back to last Friday before the attack. So Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and President Trump had a press briefing in Mar-a-Lago on Friday afternoon. Among other things, President Trump did give his support to this idea of a zero interest loan to Ukraine. And this goes in terms of our idea that Speaker Johnson has been spending the last few weeks sort of trying to figure out his position of how he can approach Ukraine aid in a way that gets President Trump's support and then negates some of the pressure when it comes to the motion to vacate. Now that pressure to motion vacate is still there, but this press conference on Friday really did help the speaker's position a little bit. Now, if you move to Saturday, obviously we saw the attack of Israel from Iran. Now we saw almost instantaneous statements from folks in the House, Speaker Mike Johnson, Representative Steve Scalise, for example, both saying that they are going to focus the bulk of this week on Israeli aid. Now, we also saw a statement from Senator Mitch McConnell stating that, this is time for the House to pass the Senate option. Now, the Senate option, if you remember, is Ukraine aid, Israel aid, and Taiwan aid to the tune around 40 to 60 billion dollars. Now, the House option, really, there is no real House option at this point. They're still trying to figure this out. But the idea here is that if Speaker Johnson and Steve Scalise move forward with an Israeli-owned package later this week, uh, really it's hard to tell if it's going to pass or not. It's not going to attract many votes from people who want to include Ukraine, look for many people to try and include Ukraine. But if it's Israel specific, Republicans could also try and use it as a vote to show Democrats not being supportive of Israel. There's a lot of ways that this can play out. But what I want to tell you, and this is what we're telling our clients, is again, if you think about the big picture and you think about the impact of defense contractors and you think about the impact of the bulk of that money is going to go towards Ukraine aid. Now, Israel, I saw one estimate from Saturday or from Sunday that Israel spent around $1.3 billion in their response. So this is fuel costs, planes, missiles, and so forth like that. And if the national security apparatus begins to go to Capitol Hill and tell policymakers, and again, I'm playing a what if scenario here, if the national security apparatus goes to Capitol Hill and starts to say, you know what, Iran has done this attack, they're not going to escalate it. Israel is still trying to figure out their response, but we don't anticipate it going to be an escalation. If there is no escalation, look for some of this momentum on Israel-specific aid to begin to die down a little bit, and we get back into this bigger package of what happens with Ukraine and Israel. But ultimately, we've said this before, and we're going to say this again, we're cautiously optimistic that the bulk of this money will go forth and be spent, whether it's a zero interest loan or whether it's U.S. funding, still to be determined. You're looking at probably around $8 to $10 billion coming in from Russian oligarchs if they pass the Repo Act, which would probably be part of this deal. But ultimately, we do think some form of Ukraine aid will go through, probably in the late May, mid to late May. Now, we had heard that there was going to be text on the Ukraine aid from the House this week. If they're focusing on Israel, that could be next week. Again, we'll probably find out in the next day or two, but stay tuned. Other things to talk about? Well, we have a see what I did here, budding effort in the Senate on marijuana. There's two things I want to talk about when it comes to marijuana stocks. First, I'm seeing a lot of retail investors talking about the DEA setting up a reschedulization decision for April 20th. I'm not exactly sure. I think the reschedulization is coming. I'm just not sure the DEA is cool enough or hip enough to want to try and tie it to April 20th, especially when there are a lot of career staffers over at the DEA who are not happy with this move. So I don't think April 20th is going to be a catalyst like some other do, and certainly these retail investors do. Now, usually what we've seen in the past when it comes to April 20th is Senate Democrats like to use that as a date to try and push forward some marijuana legalization bills and so forth like that. But I'm not sure in terms of reschedulization. I still think it's going to happen, but I just don't think April 20th is going to be that date. Now, the other thing that's budding is really the Safer Banking Act combined with the cryptocurrency bill. So just last week, we heard reports that over in the Senate, there's this idea of combining the Safer Banking Act, which is the bill that would allow banks to offer marijuana-related businesses services, with a stablecoin legislation. Now, the reason why this is going to happen is House Financial Services Committee Chairman Patrick McHenry really wants the stablecoin bill to pass. Remember, he's retiring at the end of this term, and so he really wants this to pass. But at the same time, he's probably one of the biggest opponents to safer banking. So if you combine safer banking with his stablecoin bill, the idea here is that maybe later this year, he doesn't oppose it, maybe he just holds his nose and lets the marijuana bill move forward so that he could get the stablecoin bill passed. Now, I think this is a very creative idea. I'm not confident that it's going to pass. Certainly, whichever staffer or lobbyist came up with it, they certainly earned their keep last week when they thought of this idea, because it's certainly interesting. But a couple of issues here. One, it's coming from the Senate. So if a Senate combined crypto safer banking act bill were to come up, remember, you got to get it past Elizabeth Warren, who's not very pro crypto, he's very much anti crypto. So I'm not saying it could even pass the Senate, but if it does, then it runs into the House. And the House, I think, would just say, you know what, we're going to do our own thing at all. If this were to happen, I actually think this would be a lame duck type maneuver where you would have a combined bill so that people can just get their last things off their plate before they leave and don't come back, in case of Patrick McHenry's case. So certainly look for a lot of headlines here. We have our most recent note on the terminal last week talking about this. So if you want to find more, just please let me know. Other things going on. Well, just a few minutes ago, about an hour ago, we released our next iteration of the 2024 election preview. Every few months, we take the statements from President Trump and President Biden and try and figure out what would this mean if they were to win re-election. And the highlight of this report is really executive orders. Now, my colleague Elliot Stein took a sample of everybody on the team, so finance, healthcare, TMT, so forth like that, and looked at what are the executive orders that could come out under a President Trump presidency. Because if President Trump wins, that's going to be his first play, is really to just use the power of the presidential pen to start and direct his agencies to do certain things. Now, when it comes to executive orders, I've said this before and I'll say this again, they're mostly symbolic in nature. Certainly some of them have major catalysts, but a lot of them are symbolic because they're telling agencies to do things that are already within their power. But if there is an agency action, if it's stopping something the Biden administration has already put in place, that's much easier than if they were going to tweak or change a rule. Remember, that would take 18 months to 2 years to do. So when you see these executive orders come out, if you see them come out, keep in mind, we have this report on the terminal. Now, if you're on the terminal, just go to my bio and you'll see it there. If you're off terminal and you want to see this, meaning if you're not a Bloomberg client, send me an email and I'll send it to you tomorrow I'll send you a PDF version so that you can take a look at this as well. So just send me an email at ndean10@bloomberg.net and I'll make sure that gets into your inbox. A couple other things happening this week. Well, the Senate Banking Committee is going to have a hearing on April 18th to talk about housing regulation. Now, this is something we don't talk about often at Bloomberg Intelligence just because the housing regulators, so the FHFA through Fannie and Freddie, have been somewhat quiet over the past 2 years. But there is a report, and I've done some research on this in the past, there's a report out there that came about 6-9 months ago talking about substantial changes that the Biden administration wants to move forward when it comes to housing regulation. And this hearing that's going to take place on Thursday is really going to preview what a second Biden administration would look like in terms of housing. President Biden and his administration have always said that they want to try and lower the price of homes to try and get more people to be able to purchase homes and so forth. A lot of it is urbanization movements, trying to get more urban areas to have additional, more affordable condos and apartments and so forth, to that matter. I could talk about this for 30 minutes. So if you have any housing related questions, please let me know. I can also send you that report that I have on the housing recommendations for next year. So just shoot me an email and I'll get that to you. The last thing I want to talk about is on Thursday, we're going to be releasing the next iteration of Votes and Verdicts. This is our podcast. Last week, Elliot Stein and I interviewed Better Markets CEO Dennis Kelleher. If you're in financial regulations, you know Better Markets. They are pretty much advocating on almost every single rule that I cover. And one of the questions that we asked Dennis was, okay, we're living in a new world of new courts where the Supreme Court and certainly the Fifth Circuit, if you pay attention to that, are taking the approach that maybe, regulations need to change in how they're written. You have things like the majors question doctrine. You have, if the Supreme Court does away with what is known as Chevron deference. But the question that we posed to Dennis is, should U.S. financial regulators change how they are conducting their rulemaking in order to make it easier for courts to pass, or at least easier for courts to say, yep, this is good, or should they continue? And if you're following the SEC, you know that the SEC is getting sued in the Fifth Circuit a lot, and more likely than not, the SEC is going to lose in a lot of that. Should they change their behavior or should they not change their behavior and move forward? Now, I'm not going to tell the answers yet because it comes out on Thursday. But honestly, if you don't listen to the podcast, just shoot me a note on Friday and I'll tell you anyway. But with that, I'm going to pause it there. Say thank you very much for your time and your attention. Wish you the great week, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.